Hi guys, I am here with a bit more of an impromptu interview that I hadn't planned on but thought would be a fantastic idea. I am interviewing MapuTV, the observer behind the scenes. I think many of you are starting to recognize the name as he's been at a lot of events. I first met this guy at Nation Wars, and back then you said that you weren't doing a lot of observing. What happened?
Well, it kind of just turned out this way. It's not like I planned it or anything, so I don't know. I got lucky, I guess.
Okay. All right. But I've talked to you a lot, and you have some really strong opinions on observers and observing. So that's kind of what I want to do with the interview. There's not been a lot of long form interviews with observers, but I think that you guys have a lot of things to say about what makes a good observer, what makes a good tournament, how you're treated at tournaments, so on and so forth. So, but before we get into the heart of it, right? Like said, now you're going to be a big deal observer. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey in StarCraft and how you even became an observer in the first place?
Okay, so I watched StarCraft since I was a little kid, like 12 years old, and I was already impressed by the observers back then in Brood War. So that's when I first set my eye on this, like, oh, this is kind of a cool profession to have, right? You can watch the game you love, you can see the stuff you would watch anyways if you would be back at home, and you could also make money of it working. So that's like my process of thought or experience in this way, where my origin begins basically. And then I played a lot of StarCraft 2 from the beta, but never really thought I could make a career out of it at any point. But then eventually I was at a point where my studies weren't going too well and I was trying to look for a job. And I just happened to stumble over an internship, sorry, at Take TV. And that was like my first stepping stone and how I got into the observing in general.
So you did Home Strike Cup, right?
Yes.
What are your opinions on the players' Home Strike Cup observing? Quick, what are your opinions on the players' Home Strike Cup observing 1 to 10? The players when they observe at Home Strike Cup. If 10 is absolute perfect, right? Are they a 1 or a 2?
-12.
I was hoping for an answer like that. No, but as we've come to learn, I think in StarCraft as a community, that I think it might have been 6-7 years ago, like a really long time ago, that observers really started to get more credit. There was a very stark difference from a tournament that had an observer and one that did not. The one that had a good observer and one that did not. Back in the day, I think some of the more famous names was Funka, for instance. Back then, were you still watching StarCraft 2 and judging the observing? Was he an inspiration to you at all, or were you even in StarCraft at that point?
Yeah, obviously. I was watching a lot of StarCraft, basically like since the first GSL came out and all the MLGs, all the IEMs. I watched basically everything I could get my hands on, and I was very impressed with the work Funka put out, and Legend as well, the Korean observer. He worked a long time ago in the GSL, and obviously they were an inspiration for me. So I was very happy when I first met Funka at Nation Wars, and he said like he was being impressed with me. That made me very happy, actually.
Nice. So what would you say that you took from them when you were first getting into observing and first getting better at observing? What were some of the things that you learned as you became a better and better observer? What were the most important things that you have to do as an observer?
It's a very tough question. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way, but
I know. I'm sorry. I know, but some people have said, for instance, having that innate knowledge of which event to watch as opposed to the other one, right? I remember listening to Funka talk to you 2 years ago, and he was like, you should focus on this thing, but not this thing. Can you elaborate on some of his teachings?
Well, I don't remember the teachings that much because it's so long ago, but I agree that you should always ask for feedback from the casters as an observer and from your fellow observers on decision making, what to show, because obviously I'm not a big pro gamer and Funka is not a big pro gamer, but that's not our job. So still we need to know what we really want to show the crowd. but you never know, right? It's humans we interact with. The players are humans too, so sometimes they make some decision which doesn't make any sense. But everybody is like, okay, this is gonna happen, and then the player makes a decision and nothing happens, and you show the wrong thing. So there are mistakes being made. I think like one of the biggest teachings, I guess, I still remember is don't get fed up with yourself. Just even if you make those mistakes, try to focus and stay with the ball game, basically.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think observers will feel the same like tumble down effect, like dominoes falling if you get hung up on something that you did that was pretty poor. I know some other people have said that observers are almost like a third caster. Do you agree with that? And how do you think if you agree with it, how do you think it's true?
I kind of agree with it. How is it true?
Well, you said you kind of agree with it, so explain that first, I guess.
Well, it's obviously not a caster because I don't have a voice. But then, on the other hand, I talk with pictures, I guess. So I'm still, though, I have to make those pictures work, which I show. It's a little bit complicated in that way.
Yeah. Well, okay, so here's what I'm thinking, right? Like, an observer sometimes is the third caster because sometimes I know you'll pick up on gas timings that casters will be talking about something else. So you do contribute a lot to the analysis. People say you'd be a very good player to be a very good observer. Now, how much do you weigh the analytical side of observing, with getting the right action? Do you think your duty is just to be showing the right action, or is your duty also to be elaborating on the analysis?
Oh, I feel like it's definitely both. The analysis is very important, especially in the early games, figuring out timings, figuring out the strategies in general, maybe even mind games, tricks that players try to pull on each other. We just saw Mana versus Neep earlier this tournament, and I have to say Mana pulled some mind games on Neep there. And it is very hard to figure out sometimes because it's very subtle things, and we try to focus on this if we can, but obviously the action, if it happens, is more important than to elaborate on the analysis.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that you can't be showing the gas timings when 7 roaches are dying, right? So that does make sense. But how, do you ever get frustrated with the casters when they don't pick up with some analysis, or do you realize that people 99% of people are watching the game, although there are people who only listen with audio? Do you get really frustrated when casters don't pick up on something, or are you hoping that through your good observer dedication that it'll come through anyways?
I'm not really, no, I never get frustrated with the casters. I feel like a little bit, sometimes I have to force myself to not be hung up with the information I want to get through to the casters. So I will show other stuff as well. But it's like more a problem on my side, not on the casters.
Yeah.
I guess like this is still a room to grow for me. Yeah.
Actually, we kind of glossed over this, but your opinion is that you have to be a good player to be a good observer?
Yes, kind of. Well, you have to have basic speed, I guess. You have to have a lot of game knowledge, mostly analytical, I would say.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of be able to judge engagements. So if you have those 3 attributes, even though you might not play a lot, you can just watch a lot. If you know how to do this, you can still be a good observer.
So I mean, so you consider being a good player, or actually I might have just lost my train of thought trying to listen to the crowd here, but good player, good observer, and then lost train of thought. I'm trying to make sure these guys don't get holed up talking to me and miss the fact they need to go and observe or cast or something like that. So I have like 2 ears, but I kind of lost my train of thought. But anyways, talking about players and being good observers. So I think my idea of a question is that so to be a good player, you have to know a lot about analysis. To be a good observer, you got to know analysis. Oh, I remember. Did it. Okay, so you mentioned something that was really interesting, though. You kind of glossed over it yourself, but you said mechanics. Like, you consider observers have to have good mechanics.
Kind of, yes. You obviously need to be able to keep up with the pro gamers, right? So obviously it's easier for us because we know where stuff will be when it's set up, like when there's something shift queued over the map, I will see it already, right?
Yeah.
So I can kind of set camera positions or whatever I want to prepare for this, but you still need to be able to pull this off. Even if you prepare, there's no guarantee that you can show it perfectly. So if you have bad mechanics, then you are in a kind of tough spot in a lot of games.
So this brings me to a specific question I know about you. You have a very specific setup. You have a keyboard from the 1800s.
It might be even older.
it might be older. But yeah, like, do you find that a lot of other observers have very specific setups, or is this something that, like, individual to you?
No, everybody has their complete own setup. Like, especially for hotkeys, which is very important. Everybody from the observers I know uses a very unique hotkey setup, and well, the hardware kind of as well, obviously. But then again, everybody's a gamer, so gamers use their own hardware, right?
Yeah, but I feel like when people think of observing, they think of mouse control mostly, for instance, But I recently learned in Germany, actually, this guy uses camera hotkeys for observing, and that's actually not something I would have thought of as someone who's not a professional observer. Are there any other things that might be like glossed over from the public that you have to do as an observer, like have hotkeys, like camera location hotkeys? I mean, what are your hotkeys? Why do you need such a specific setup?
Well, I like to have very simple hotkeys, so I only need to press one button to have one action. And the standard observer setup is like you need to press shift or control a lot to pull out some information. So I try to avoid that at all. And with the positions, it's like especially for harassment and fights, it's very good. If you have multi-prong attacks, you can use positional hotkeys and circle around with the mouse on the minimap and go back to your original position with the camera hotkey, for example.
So to like break down an engagement, say that you were, and I love using this, like there's a nuke.
Yeah.
So there's a nuke, and you love catching the actual nuke exiting, right? So there's a nuke that you got to catch to exit. There's a nuke you got to catch to land. There's a fight happening, and there's a drop happening. That almost didn't work. My finger messed up. And like you have to decide how to do that. That's all camera hotkeys. And do you hotkey any of the units? Is that even allowed?
Well, I can't hotkey any units.
Okay, I didn't think that was allowed, but I was like, wait a second, do I just not know the observer interface? So it's mostly the camera hotkeys. How many camera hotkeys do you have?
I usually use up to 4.
Oh, okay.
It's not too many, but you can use like the following button on a unit if you select it,
Yeah.
for example. So you create like your 5th location, basically.
Wait a minute, you can.
So if you for example, I'm in the main base, right?
Yeah.
But I have some 2 adapts selected which go over the map right now, and I
okay.
just press the follow button. It will jump the camera over there.
You select something so you can jump to it. These are, like, I don't think I think of these things like basic observing is just really you catch the action, you maybe don't miss as many things on the mini map, but I mean, these are the things that are like really truly great observing, right? Yeah. But do you have any thoughts on what that ascension level is? For instance, I know I asked you about the observer that's here. What's his gamer tag?
Insano, I think.
That's what I thought. I was like, it's not Insane. That's a player. But anyways, yeah. So we haven't seen too much of him, but you say you're actually quite impressed with him. You actually got to do observing with Fear Dragon at Leipzig, and that was a different experience. What have you noticed makes you impressed with an observer, or makes you really proud of your own observing, like specific games to games, compared to someone who just does like the bare basics?
So yeah, well, you want to have the complete package, right? You want to see every action basically in a very good way. And what is impressive is a lot of people underestimate camera movements. So I feel like his camera movements are pretty good. So that's what impressed me the most, while he keeps up his whole package of not missing stuff. And
by camera movements, do you mean like drag around, like not being choppy, or not like using, God forbid, border scroll? Like you mean that, right?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So making a cinematic experience almost, like actually in movies they have the thing that glides with the camera, makes it look very nice, and I guess it is quite similar for observing. So do you think of yourself as making a bit of a movie?
No, but at least a TV show.
At least a TV show. Gotcha. All right, so observing as a skill set has just been really interesting, as I feel like we had our time where we had no observers, then we had our time with good observers, and then we had our time where we have good observers, of course, and not saying we don't, but it kind of fell into the wayside again. I mean, sometimes you guys aren't even noted on the announcement page for talent. So let's go into kind of a different side of observing here, and that's the behind the scenes side, which is, what do you think of your presence in StarCraft? Do you think observers should get more credit? Do you think you should be even part of the talent lineup? Do you think that you're okay being a bit more behind the scenes with production, for instance? Or it's actually kind of the question, would you refer to yourself as production or as talent?
That's a very hard question. I had a lot of discussions with that already with other people behind the scenes, and I feel still it's kind of part of talent, because you need this immense game knowledge as an observer, and even though you are not on camera, like every action you do will be shown, so I feel you still communicate to the viewers basically.
Yeah.
So I feel in that regard you're still talent, or should be still talent, but the recent year it hasn't been that, so I guess that's all about the announcement and stuff.
Yeah. Without getting into too much, this is going to fire both of us details, but no, there has been seriously, I think, a lack of appreciation for observers. Most recently, you were a bit forgotten about in the announcement. I mean, does it actually kind of pain you to be forgotten, or is it something that you're used to because observers have never really been on the forefront?
Well, the forefront-ish time was when Funka and Coca mostly were observing during the HOTS era, I figure.
Yeah.
So I started after that, so I never really stepped into this stage where I had this appreciation in the first place. It would be nice to have, obviously, but it's not something you can force, right?
Yeah.
So
it's not something you can actually pick up Joe Schmo on the street and tell them to do it. It not only takes technical knowledge, but it also does take StarCraft knowledge. So I definitely would love you guys to be talent. We constantly make fun of you guys for not being talent, to be honest, but it would make so much more sense. But yeah, I really hope that this maybe shines some light on what the observers have to deal with, and maybe even to really push that point. How often are you guys, how long are you guys at rehearsal? How long are you guys usually at a venue? What is your daily schedule like when you go to these events?
you mean time-wise, or?
I mean, you get up at 7:30, you come here at 9:30, you're here until midnight. That's a lot of these events, right?
Yeah, kind of. It depends obviously on the games, but honestly, if we have good games, I don't mind it at all. Okay. Having those long days, because I just love the game and I love watching it, and that's why I'm doing the job. Honestly, if not for that, it would be a fucking hard job.
Of course, but even sometimes you're the only observer, or there's only one observer. What is, in your opinion, the ideal number of observers for a weekend event like this?
Well, 2 at least. 3 would be nice sometimes, because you can literally do big breaks then for the observers as well. We only get scrape-by breaks. But honestly, I love doing events on my own, because I just love having one game fired up after the other.
You love all the credit.
No. I just love it because I get into a flow, right?
Oh, okay.
And I love being there. When I'm in the zone, I feel like I don't do anything wrong. And even though if I make a mistake, I don't feel bad about it.
So even 12, 14-hour days, you're fine?
Yeah.
How are your wrists?
Actually, never been bad during observing. When I play at home, sometimes they hurt. But I'm doing stretching and all that, so yeah. I'm trying to keep up some posture for the arms, I guess.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, just shedding some light on the observers. You guys are probably even at some points more passionate than anyone else in the scene, being behind the stage, not getting a lot of that face time, a lot of credits, doing long hours with sometimes very, very little appreciation. And it's just, it's a shame, but I hope this interview kind of shed some light, as I said. And I want to thank you so much for taking your time out of your break, the very few breaks you have, to talk to me about this. And I hope it was a good experience for you to kind of get out your side as an observer. So if you want to shout out your Twitter or anything,
Yeah, sure. My Twitter handle is MapuTV, I think. I'm not 100%
I think that is.
sure. But yeah,
I think it is.
Please consider giving me a following.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much again. And thanks you guys for watching. I'm running out of words, guys. And peace. Bye-bye.